Have you ever sat and stared up at the stars and wondered, where did we come from? Let's take a journey like no other, not to a place, but to a time. Join us as we delve deep into the human past and explore our shared human origins. Welcome to the world of paleoanthropology. Hey everyone, friends and family of World of Paleoanthropology. It's me, Seth Choggy, your host, and today I'm joined by another special guest for our series, The Story of Us, and I'll hand it over to him so he may introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Seth, for having me on. My name is John Murray. I'm a PhD student at Arizona State University in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. And my research focuses on understanding early heat treatment technology, which is the use of fire to alter stone, and kind of when it arose and how these people were doing it in the past.
And I think that's some very technical sounding, fantastic work that you're doing. And maybe we'll get into some of the details of that as we go on. But along with that, you are also here today because you are offering your assistance and help in, you know, recent college graduates who are looking into grad school, and you being in the position that you're in, have gone through so much of it yourself, have helped so many other individuals, that you have a lot of tips and info. So I guess, you've been helping me personally even, but I don't want this to be about my experience because my experience is going like every which way it could possibly go. So what would you say is a more like well, obviously you don't want to wait till you graduate to start looking at grad school. So what would you say is the first step in just you've decided you want to go to grad school. Now what?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that is a good starting point. And I would say like the first thing you really need to think about is kind of what type of research and what kind of like thing you would like to study for your graduate work. So you don't have to have like a super specific project in mind while you're applying, but you should at least kind of have an idea of like whether or not you want to do archaeology or like biological anthropology or, some sort of like initial sub-discipline within like anthropology, for example. And then you can kind of start working with professors in your department that do that sort of thing to try to get, hands-on experience or, possibly working with graduate students in your department. I'm trying to get a feel for like when you're an archaeologist studying lithic technology, like what kind of research do you do? Like what do you study? What things do you need to know before you kind of do that deep dive in graduate school? And it's good to do that as early as possible because you in theory you might think you like something and then when you actually start doing it, it might not be what you expect.
Yes, as I think even we hear, professors and famous people in our field talk about they didn't even know what paleoanthropology was sometimes until they were already in college. So a
Yeah,
lot of times things can change pretty drastically. So I think that's a really good tip of test the waters, figure out what you want.
exactly. Yeah.
What would you say, because everyone always feels like they have to get into the top school, the best school. What do you say to people who aren't considering schools maybe with lesser known programs, but professors that are highly motivated and have resources, or other such situations that maybe aren't the movie style, I'm going to grad school, here's what happened?
Yeah, and that's one of the big, I think there's like two big issues with like early on undergrads in their view of what grad school is and the application process is one of them is you're looking for these big, huge programs like Ivy League, level schools. But for graduate school, you kind of want to think about who your advisor is going to be more so than the schools that you're applying to. So you want to have an advisor that is doing the type of research that you want to do, because the advisor mentee relationship like through graduate school is basically an apprenticeship program. You're learning from your advisor to be a scientist in that specific method or field of research that you're going to work on and develop your career into. So you want to work with someone that is an expert in what you want to study. That might be something like theoretical or really big picture, or it could be really specific that's like very methods focused or something like that. And I think the second fallacy like about graduate school is that you have to be like a perfect undergraduate student and like have an immaculate record, 4.0 GPA, like get 90th percentile or above on your GRE scores and things like that. And I've heard so many undergraduates that I've worked with, like at ASU and stuff, really stress and worry over this. Like if they're going to do bad on a test or, they fail a class or get a poor grade in a class. And that is not true. Like, of course, it's better if you have a good GPA. Like if that's not going to hurt you. If you do well on the GRE, that's not going to hurt you. But you're not necessarily out for the count if you do poorly during your undergrad. You just need to have other things that either you're doing or that you like let graduate committees know or make them aware of things that might have happened in your life that like led to certain things or whatever. And I'm a pretty good example of this because as an undergrad, my first few years at Stony Brook, I was a biology major. I had no idea like what I really wanted to do after. Like I knew I kind of wanted to go to grad school. I failed chemistry. I failed physics. I got kicked out on academic probation. Like my GPA was like a 1.3 or something like that. When I was like, I got to change majors. Like something's just not working for me. And took intro to archaeology with John Shea. I watched him Flintknap on stage and I was like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I switched majors and was able to show like through my like academic record that once I switched majors, I was able to hold like a 4.0 in anthropology or something like that. So even though my overall GPA was really low, I was still able to demonstrate that I had, some sort of, affinity for, what it takes to be a graduate student. So, people like you should strive to do your best, but things happen in life and like people understand that. So if you're interested in doing it, you should pursue it regardless.
And I can't agree with that more because so many people, it's so disheartening to see them discouraged and turned down for simple misthinking of, oh, there's no way this is going to happen because I failed that one class one year and it's over, after this, I'm done. But that person wants to learn so much more and they can learn so much more. And so to have resources out there and people such as yourself that are educating people about applying to grad school, that they can still get in, they can still be a successful grad student, they can still get their PhD, that means a lot to a lot of people, I feel. Now, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Another major aspect of grad school that I think a lot of people really freak out about is, of course, major funding. Now, I can think of 5 ways to Sunday to pay for grad school. But from what I know, depending, of course, on the school and the program, at least in our field, getting an anthropology PhD, a lot of the mid to larger schools, even some of the smaller ones, will have quite positive looking financial aid. It seems anthropology is a field that definitely gets a lot of money in it overall. I'd say it's not balanced, but I think overall the field sees some money. What would you say when a person is looking at their dream school, they've been accepted, and now they need to fund it?
Yeah. I mean, of course, if people have like personal wealth or family wealth, like, and they're able to afford doing a PhD without funding, you can do that, but I highly advise most people against doing that because, it could be 6 to 10 years of schooling to finish your project. And most programs, like you said, they do have funding for their students, and a lot of funding, or a lot of programs will, only admit students that they can fund. They won't take excess. So, that could be something that, maybe someone is denied because there's just not enough funding.
Right.
Like that could happen. It could have nothing to do with their application. But I highly advise against taking out loans for graduate school. It yeah, you just don't know how long it's going to take. It's expensive. So I would, yeah, for most people, I would say you should only go to graduate school if you get funding from the program, or if you get, an NSF GRFP or something, which is, a funding opportunity from the National Science Foundation that could support your first few years in graduate school.
Definitely. And I think, from other people I've talked to, the funding really depends on the department and the subject. So that is something people who might not just be into paleo listening to this should check into, and not just, assume or anything.
Yeah.
So first off, just continuing, is there any unsolicited advice I can get from you about grad school?
So I guess it kind of stems from that, funding thing. One thing I recommend everyone do is learn how, as early as you possibly can in your undergraduate career, learn how to just like cold email people. It's probably one of the most important skills that you can learn as an undergrad, to just email like your potential like advisor in a place that you're interested in like working, and try to set a meeting up, like explain that you're interested in their work or like this type of research. And you can ask them like, how does the admission process work? What is the funding like? You can get this information before you even apply. And
Mhm.
in a lot of cases, professors they're not going to tell someone to apply if there's no money. So if
Right.
people explain that, they might just tell them to wait a cycle or like apply elsewhere. It happens all the time.
Mhm.
And I think being able to, write a short, concise, like email to someone that you don't know, it takes a little bit of like practice, like wording, how you should say it, like the types of things you should include in there, and how to introduce yourself. But it's a really important skill that could uh, help you get a lot more information about the program and the advisor that you're potentially going to work with.
Absolutely. And I think I'll even add to that a point that has been nailed into my head is you need to contact your potential advisors or who you'd like to be working under before applying. You need to have a rapport with them on some level.
Yeah, I mean, you can apply, you cannot do that, but I don't recommend it, especially because, you want to like meet them as do your best to try to get gauged like what kind of person they are and whether or not like you're going to be able to work with them for 7 to 8 years potentially.
mm,
Um, and if you another thing I really recommend, that's kind of another unsolicited advice, is reaching out to graduate students or recent graduate students that the people have worked with, um, and asking about the program, like, how is the advising style of the person that you want to work with? Like, are they kind of like a really hands-off, let you do your own thing kind of advisor, or are they like a helicopter advisor where, they're with you at every single stage, helping you with everything that you're doing? Because, if you're a student that needs or wants that kind of like helicopter advisor, but the person you're going to apply with is, the complete opposite of that, you're kind of doing yourself a little bit of a disservice and, hindering, your like success almost, because that would be a big adjustment to kind of learn how to work independently and that kind of stuff. It's obviously not a deal breaker, but if that's something that helps you, then it would be good to know going in, like what kind of advising style they have.
absolutely. And one thing that I was told in particular about like using ASU as an example was some schools have really small anthropology departments, some schools have really big anthropology departments, and some schools you're going to get a lot more attention than others, kind of what you're mentioning with the helicoptering, but it might not even be their personality, it might be how many students there are.
For sure. Yep. That's a really good point. Yeah, like if the person you want to go work with has 5 students currently, like that's a lot of people to, keep track of and mentor. It's not impossible, but yeah. Like I've heard of people that have 20 students, like with including masters and things like that, which is, you'd want to know that going in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, before we switch over more to your work and what you do in the field personally, is there anything else you'd want to add about the grad school situation or advice you have?
I think the only other thing that I'd mention to people is starting to work on your statement of purpose basically as early as you can, because it's the most important thing you'll write probably until you get after your PhD, because it's what gets you in. And um, you should send it to as many people as possible to look at and give you comments. Like I think when we talked about it a few weeks or a month ago, mine took 10 to 20 drafts where like by the end of it I was changing like words, like it was
Yeah.
down, it became so nitpicky by the end of it. And the kind of key things that you want to address are, what do you want to study, or like what type of research do you want to do, why that school or advisor is, the right choice, and really focus on the advisor. How are you prepared to do this research? So like what experience demonstrates that you're prepared to go to graduate school? And lastly, like what do you want to do in the future? Do you want to go into industry? Do you want to become a teacher? Do you want to become a research professor? That's really good information for people that are going to be accepting you to know. And I just want to say for anyone like that watches this that is thinking about applying to graduate school, I'm totally happy to share my statement of purpose and my application materials for like when I applied to ASU, my CV and everything like that. Like I'm completely willing to share that with people.
And we will make sure whatever way you want people to contact you is in the description of the video below. So like
Sure, yeah.
do that and you can help them out because looking at yours definitely helped me out a lot. Or I haven't written it yet. So it's helping me. It's helping me write it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's in your head. It's in your head.
yeah, exactly. So switching over, you already told us kind of what the moment was that switched you on anthropology, and it was seeing Dr. John Shea, who has been a guest on the show for those of you who are new to the channel, and it was a great show. We talked a lot about, you'll hear what we talk about, but great guy. Um, what got you to where specifically in napping that you're interested in now with the pyrotechnology, and how did that start?
Yeah. So it kind of started again during my undergrad at Stony Brook with another one of John Shea's classes called it used to be called Primitive Technology. I don't know if it's still called that. But it basically was a class doing experimental archaeology. It was super hands-on. We did flint knapping, like fire making, all sorts of stuff. And I really fell in love with doing experimental archaeology. And I knew that like I wanted to incorporate that in my future work. So when I did my master's, I did an experimental useware project with April Noel at some of the lower Paleolithic stuff in Jordan, where I was trying to figure out what hand axes were being used for at the site. And that involved flint knapping. I was able to like do more practice. I learned from an expert flint knapper, Dan Stuber. I went to his house for like 5 days and just napped with him all day. And it was one of the best experiences and like really helped me get over that initial learning curve with flint knapping. And when I got to ASU, I again, was thinking about a project that could incorporate some kind of experimental archaeology and flint knapping. And it kind of happened fortuitously though, because a couple of Curtis's past, so Curtis Marion is my advisor, a couple of his past students had been working on a project developing methods to better detect whether or not an individual artifact of that's made out of silkrete, which is a rock from South Africa, was heat treated or not. And it was using this 3D microscope and based on changes in surface roughness. And all the students like graduated and went on to do other things. So they kind of had this project that was, 75% completed, and they needed someone to basically, see it through and like try to publish it. And I took over that as kind of like a side project for research credits and things like that, to help them out, like get myself more experience. And I ended up like when I started writing in the paper, I was like, dang, like there's a lot we don't know about heat treatment. And
Mhm.
that kind of was that moment that like this is a major gap in the literature that can really tell us a lot about human behavior, and Homo sapiens like living in South Africa 100,000 years ago. And I decided that, yeah, I wanted to try to address this gap. And I've been doing the like actualistic experiments, trying to heat treat silkrete in different ways, to build proxies to identify them in the archaeological record. So that kind of was like a long version of how I got into the project, but ultimately by chance.
So you've fallen in love with flint napping, or not flint, I'm sorry, napping.
Flintknapping, yeah.
Uh, Different things, as we know, could be obsidian, could be flint, could be. I am not very versed on what it could be, honestly.
Yeah, we still all call it Flintknapping.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I didn't make a goof.
Nope.
Um, so you're into flint napping. You've now found something that fell kind of into your lap on a more specific topic. Is that project finished now?
Yeah. So that part of the project was finished. We published the paper in like 2020. And from that, I've now like, further developed more, it kind of is like a braided river. Like once you get that first thing going, tons of side things come out of it that continues the research and moving it forward. And yeah, it's still ongoing. Like I can't do fires in my backyard like during the summer here because of the fire warnings and
Yeah.
stuff. But during the winter, I'm doing my experimental work in my backyard. I shipped like 400 pounds of silkrete back from South Africa like 3 years ago or so, right before the pandemic happened, and I've kind of still been working through that. And um, ultimately the goal is to like have a really large actualistic reference sample of heat treated silkrete, and it's kind of addressing this big thing that we really don't know, and it's like how were middle stone age humans heat treating silkrete. So we know that there's been a lot of publications in the last 15 years that have shown that there's heat treated silkrete possibly as early as 160,000 years ago, at pinnacle point 13b. And we know it happened, about 120,000 years ago at a few other sites, and then at like 70,000 years ago at Pinnacle Point 5-6, and then again, it's just all over South Africa around 70,000. So it becomes really common, and we really don't know what they were doing to heat treat it. And there's three main hypotheses for how they were doing it. One, they might have just thrown it right into the fire. We call that like the direct heating method. Um, that's kind of risky. The nodules explode, it overheats them. So it's not really the best way if you want to create like these really fine bifacial points that you see at like the still bay points in South Africa. And another method is the sand bath method, which basically you would dig a pit in the ground, put your silkrete, cover it with sand, and then build a fire over it and let it burn down to coals. You do that for like 5 or 6 hours and then kind of just leave it there overnight. And it heats the silkrete indirectly through the sand. So the sand heats up and then the silkrete, gets heated by the sand. And then there's kind of a middle ground between the two, that's called like the ember method or pile of ember method. And that's basically where you would kind of let the coals burn down, put the silkcrete next to the fire, and like slowly put coals over the silkcrete. So it's like direct, but not in the flames, like, in that really, really hot part. And we really don't have great proxies or like ways to identify which method was happening. And essentially my project is, making really big reference data sets for each of these different hypotheses to then go to the archaeological record, and see whether or not we can use these proxies that I'm developing with the actualistic experiments to interpret the archaeological record. And it has really important implications because it's been argued that heat treatment might signify, a modern form of social learning and teaching that's kind of unique to humans and Homo sapiens, or possibly like aspects of our cognition that might have been different from archaic humans. And this mostly is due to the technological complexity. So the number of steps required to do these different processes, and also like the kind of combination or combining different raw materials that are not really related into one to achieve like a goal. So it has a few different really important behavioral things about it that would be really important to know when we start to see that in the South African record.
Amazing. That's, I love hearing about new topics and new ways that we're exploring old topics and just learning so much. But now, going backwards a little bit
Mhm.
for those who might be struggling a little, what does heat treating stone do? And why
Yeah,
would someone do it?
yeah, that's a great question. So with silkcrete and flint, it's a lot. You can heat treat um, silicious stone that once you do it, it basically makes it easier to flake or to nap. So it makes it easier to break, basically. So we see there's a reduction in fracture toughness and an increase in hardness of the material, which allows it to break easier, basically. Excuse me. And other people have shown that silkcrete flakes are actually sharper when they're heat treated than when they're unheated. And there's also been research that shows that from one single like nodule of rock, when it's heated, you actually get more flakes out of it than when it's unheated.
Hmm.
So it's more efficient to flake a heat treated nodule than an unheated nodule. But it comes at the cost of having to heat treat it. So that's a big, resource and time intensive thing, depending on what method of heat treatment you're doing. So it essentially boils down to just make it easier to flint knap.
So, in my mind, I'm trying to think right now and weigh the pros and cons of all of the work that involves heat treatment, which, I'm not completely familiar with, versus just making a new tool when you need it.
Right.
Which is, you do both. Which can you do faster?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point. And it depends, I guess, what they were doing with it. And we see with like silkcrete, there's kind of a tendency to make pretty similar type tools across a lot of the sites. So a lot of these things we call backed pieces, which are like blades that have been retouched into like crescent shaped or like trapezoidal shapes that are thought to be hafted as like projectile technology. We see a lot of those being made with heat treated silkcrete, whereas with like another raw material that is much more abundant on the landscape and doesn't require heat treatment, we see much more just like regular flakes and points that are like unretouched. So they're kind of a little bit more expedient. They were just using them for like kind of getting flakes because they're so abundant. And but it's a really good question, and that's why we are like, why are they doing this? Like,
Right.
why are they investing this time to doing it? And another thing that I didn't mention that is kind of non-functional with the silkcrete or with heat treatment in general is that the rocks become like more glossy and smooth and also like darker and redder. So there's some color change. And we
Mhm.
know in later time periods, like rocks are sometimes heat treated for that color change.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, there's no way of knowing if that had anything,
Yeah,
but something
exactly.
to contemplate, something to contemplate.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what have you found to be the most surprising of what you have uncovered in what you've been doing so far?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the most surprising thing with my experiments was um, doing the ember method, the one where you would like put the coals over the nodule. Um, to do it really successfully, it takes actually a lot more skill than you would think to like kind of slowly like introduce the coals over, like to kind of make it to do it really well and not fracture the flakes or the nodules that you're heating. um it took a little bit of time to like get used to introducing the coals to the rock. So I would say that was like, I thought it would be just like, yeah, you just put it on and you leave it, but
Right.
to do it well, it takes a little bit more like finesse.
That makes sense. It seems like anything that would be, too easy never is.
Yeah.
Now, flipping that around a little bit, what has been the hardest aspect of your work so far?
Yeah. That's honestly like one of the hardest thing is just like the management of like the data after the fact. Like, you produce this massive assemblage of like data, and like in my case it's just tons of experimentally produced flakes, and labeling them, like making sure the naming scheme is right, what has been done on every flake with like the methods that we're developing to answer the questions that we're interested in. um, all that kind of management of data is really difficult if you don't have a good plan in place. And fortunately, I had a somewhat decent plan based on like previous work from those students that I mentioned, and um, just from other people that I interacted with when I got there at ASU that helped me with this, because they knew it's a problem. And kind of just like where it all goes, like if you don't have the space to store all this, like for a while it was just at my house. So that's kind of like an unforeseen thing that, like, if you don't have a plan in place, could be really difficult to deal with.
Absolutely. Which brings up a funny point that I want to get to in a second, but I want to show this off first. So,
Mhm.
at ASU recently, and it was, for Dr. Bill Kimball's inaugural lecture series, for those who don't know. And I was lucky enough that you offered to give me a tour, and you gave me something that honestly is become a prized possession of mine. And I want you to tell us, not showing as well as I wanted it to, but what is this?
Yeah, so that's a hand axe. And it's basically a stone that was flaked on both sides. So we call them bifaces. So you could see all those like ridges and scars on it. Those are from pieces of the rock being removed on both sides of it. And essentially you do this in a strategic manner to make a specific shape, and to make it, a specific thickness, while you're flint knapping. And I love making hand axes because, they're one of the most iconic stone tool types. Like,
Mm,
usually when people think about, stone tools and human evolution, that's one of the first that comes to mind, because they were around for like over 1 million years. And, a lot of projectile points are essentially the same types of technology in just a smaller scale. Um, so it's kind of that first major leap in stone tool technology and what they're in the shaping and the process of making. So it
ab-
kind of has like a little, piece of my heart in there with with making them. I can't stop.
which brings me to the point that I wanted to. It was almost, I think you were making a joke, but I think you were being dead serious. Was you have all these flakes, you have all this debutage. Where do you put it? You can't just throw it in a landfill because that could screw up who knows what down the line.
Yep.
So what do you do with all of these broken flakes that aren't I'll throw out that often, I don't know often, but sometimes these things are auctioned off for student fundraising and things like that. So the good pieces have uses, but all these broken flakes that you're not using for your research,
Right.
what happens to those?
Yeah, so a lot of flint knappers that I know, that when they have, we call it debitage. That's all like kind of the waste product of flint knapping. When you get to the point where like you don't have any flakes that you can like make into little like projectile points or make anything small out of, a lot of people will fill up like plastic buckets with caps on them and put tons of coins in there that like are from that year. So
Mhm.
like it doesn't mess up like, the archaeological record of the future or anything like that, or things don't get mistaken for past flint knapping events and things like that. So people, you can bring it to landfill as long as you're doing something about not mixing it in with or if you're not bringing it to landfill, I mean, you want to make sure you're not going to have anyone mistake it for like archaeology,
Right.
which a lot of the time it's pretty noticeable, and if you are like experienced a little bit, most people think of all the really nice pieces in the archaeological record, but a lot of them are really pretty shitty when you actually find them. Even the projectile points and stuff, they're always much fatter when you find them in their archaeological record a lot of the time because they were functional. They didn't care about the aesthetics as much as we did. In some cases they did, and we with the caches and things like that. But yeah.
I think I just remembered on the room that we ended in was just the room where you did all the napping, and there was just this big, maybe 3 foot pile of debutage, and it was just so interesting to just think of, out of all the stone that's used, how much that goes unused, or some of these pieces looked, I mean, they were perfect, and then I assume just at the end something happens and they break.
Yep.
How, I mean, with how many that you go through, do you still feel a pang of heartache when that happens, or are you okay?
No, there's always that moment. There's another graduate student at ASU that flint naps with me, Nick Hansen, and we're always joking about like, you know, we're like such crazy perfectionists. Like we're like, one little thing that you notice that probably no one else will notice about the piece that you're working. So you're trying to fix it. Things get smaller and smaller as you're trying to fix it because you then mess up again. Or then you just snap it by the end of it. And then it's just like you just wasted like however long it took you to do it. And it kind of just, you end up accepting it, but it does take a little bit out of you every single time that happens. Um, but it's just the nature of it. You got to be stubborn.
Right, right. Well, we've talked about grad school, we've talked about flint napping, we've talked about field research. What's next for you?
So in a couple weeks in the beginning of June, I'm going to be going to South Africa to do some lab work to collect dissertation data. So
Mhm.
I'll be down there for the summer, analyzing the Silkrete artifacts from Pinnacle Point 56, and working with some field school students that are down there that are going to be helping us with some other projects that we have in the lab down there. So that's kind of my, next couple months are going to be looking at rocks for 8 or 9 hours a day, every day.
And I think the rest of your life might be looking at
Yeah. The one fun thing though is we do some flint napping while we're at the lab. So Nick will be like the guy I just mentioned. Well, he'll be down there for a couple of weeks, and we get to nap some of like the local material, like quartzite, which is really tough to nap. So it's kind of like we always joke that we go down there and we just like forget everything we learned because it's such a different material that you have to be like much more you have to use much more force and be much more precise to do the things that would be much easier with like obsidian and flint. So we kind of get reschooled every time we go down there.
well, I in something like this, I think the saying practice makes perfect is definitely applicable. So, and you know what? I think unless there's anything you would like to end on, sir, I think that might be where we draw this episode to a conclusion.
Yeah, no, I the only thing is just, yeah, if anyone wants help on their statements of purpose or wants to see mine, don't hesitate to ask.
Awesome. And like I said, I will get that info in the description. So hopefully we get some help to some people who are looking for it.
Yeah,
And I just want to thank you for coming on the show, and you were a great guest.
awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, that was it for this episode of The Story of Us with Seth. I've got, like I said, more than I've ever had planned before. So stay tuned and subscribe. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Story of Us, where we interview and talk to researchers who are doing the work in the field. We hope that you learned something, as there's always more to learn, and please stay tuned to the next episode, which will be airing in a couple of weeks. Please sure to check out our merch store, and, it never hurts to leave a tip. So, thank you for learning, and see you next time.